this, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but to let you know that we are here to talk about, is what I'm feeling stress or is it trauma? There's been so many things that have happened over this year, countless, but specifically with the winter storm and the compounded experience of the pandemic, we wanted to provide some education about that. And we hope that you're able to learn a little bit more today. My name is Alita Andrews, and I am a trauma clinician here at JFS.
My name is Japa. I am a clinical psychologist at JFS, working in the Holocaust survivor care. We are delighted to have you join us today, Alita.
Yes. So with that being said, we have a lot to cover. We tried to make it fun and interactive and also informative and science-based. So we do introduce the difference between, am I experiencing stress or trauma, or when does it become something that I would like to seek help for? Also, we wanted to normalize your experience because this year has been like nothing. Unprecedented is something that was used back last year, but it really has been unprecedented. So we really wanted to make sure that we provide some normalization of what you're experiencing. And then Yafa will guide us through some coping skills, and we'll actually get to practice some grounding skills at the end. And we'll be able to talk a little bit about how to access services at JFS in case you're curious at the end of this presentation. But with that being said, we probably will have questions. If you do, please make sure to either write it down on a piece of paper or type it in the chat, and we'll have time at the end for a question answer opportunity. We want to make sure we get to those. So we're thankful to have some JFS staff on site, or I guess on this virtual site. For technology concerns, please feel free to reach out to Britton Williams, and we had them put JFS in front of their names, so please feel free to individually chat them for any technology concerns or any questions. And we also have some additional clinical support. We have Danielle Jones. She's an LMSW, as well as Deborah Liebensberger. And then we have the manager of intake services, Carrie Nottingham, on the phone call. If you need any assistance or anything, they're there to help, and we're excited to get started. Okay, Yafa, would you like to introduce stress?
So life itself is not stressful, but stress is something that you and I may experience. The same situation can be stressful to one person, but not be stressful to another. For example, when I drive my car or I have a brief power outage, not really stressful, but a tornado or a prolonged power outage in the dead of winter, stressful. Who we are, our experiences and our knowledge and our resources can mediate the impact of any given situation and how we may experience it. So stress is actually the body's response to anything that requires our attention or anything that requires an action. Stress can manifest as mental, emotional, or physical changes. You and I experience potentially stressful events every day that do not necessarily lead to stress. The graph you're looking at right now shows that stress can actually be a good thing. It enhances focus. It can lead to peak performance. Too little of the same thing may not be good. Too much of that is not good either. Potential stressors can also be positive or negative events in our life. So positive stressors are things like life transitions. For example, going to college, getting married, having a child, or retiring are normally considered great things, yet they can also be stressful. Getting a new job, moving to a new house or to a new community can be a very positive change, even if it's also stressful. We also have negative stressors, and those are things like illness or accidents or experiences of loss, like divorce or unemployment or even death. Other negative stresses can be things like interpersonal conflict, arguments or discord, or social conflict, like riots or racism, or national conflicts like wars. Other negative common stressors are pandemics and natural disasters. Earthquakes, tsunamis, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, winter storms, and many others. Natural disasters and pandemics can affect thousands or even millions of people, and yet each of us individually had to deal with our unique set of circumstances and challenges, and therefore experience those events in different ways. What was stressful for one person may not have been stressful for another. And while some of us may have done well isolated at home, reading books, taking up new hobbies, working from our dining rooms, reconnecting with family and friends, others may have struggled to keep a job while caring for young children, or supporting kids or teens to continue learning in Zoom school, managing day-to-day living without any assistance, or struggling to access necessary medical care for complex health problems. And others may have even battled COVID-19 as patients or health providers.
So now what we're going to ask is if you can put in the chat what kind of stressful events you've been through in the last year. Feel free to include the positive ones like moving, or the ones that are a little overwhelming. If you want to go ahead and start that, we'll be ready to reflect those.
So many of us have experienced all kinds of stressors in the last year, needing to traveling or wanting to travel and not being able to do it is one of the things that some have experienced. Others have issues with childcare, or maybe they had problems with securing supplies, or maybe they stayed home but they were afraid to go out. Others may not have been able to continue with natural routines or exercise, felt disconnected from family or friends. Yes, you may have had issues with the purchase of a house or other needs that you needed to get, and having difficulty having those things delivered. During the winter storms, surely the loss of water and electricity were huge issues for a lot of people. We have staff member at JFS who were in one of the shelters in a warming center for more than one night because of the lack of electricity. So we have all experienced numerous stressors, and some of us have even been affected by them. Our bodies showing the impact of that stress or the trauma. And yet, others have been spared, even when dealing with significant problems. How is that possible? How can we improve our chance of doing well under significant stress? And are there any ways to build our own resilience so in the future, our bodies will respond better to stress or traumatic events? Well, let's start by looking at the science behind all of this. Alida will guide us through the next section.
I can get to the next slide. There we go. Hello, everyone. So yes, our brain and our bodies are wonderfully hardwired with an alarm system for our protection. This response is automatically triggered during stressful events. So hormones are sent throughout the body to be able to support you while needing to complete activities, or push through during stressful times, or just try and continue to drive even whenever it's scary outside and all these different rain that we've been having lately. This results in physical sensations, making our bodies ready to perform in many different ways. So we are about to go over what happens automatically when you're experiencing stress. For example, the muscles, they tend to tense up, feeling tensed can really help you guard the body against injury and pain. And you may feel, if you notice any sort of tension in your neck or shoulders throughout this pandemic, that's completely normal. And it's something that it should ideally, the tension should release when the stress passes. But over this last year, the stress doesn't seem to stop sometimes. Also the lungs and breathing. Since the airway between the lung and the nose constrict, preparing your lungs, you might start breathing a little bit more rapidly and shallow. This may be something that you don't even notice, or maybe you do. Our breath is so automatic and involuntary that we forget it's there sometimes, but we can always remember that our breath is there to regulate and center us. This makes me think of having to adjust to teaching with a mask, or working in outside with a mask and trying to adjust to all these different things. Breathing is already overwhelming during a stressful event. So that's another thing that we're getting used to. Another option is that your heart starts pumping, getting your blood flowing. Adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol are hormones that are associated with this. So your heart rate becomes faster, your blood vessels dilate, and more blood is pumped to the muscles, like we were talking about earlier. And this can lead to symptoms, like feeling like a really your heart beating quickly, as well as sometimes you can feel like your blood pressure is higher during stressful events, and sometimes palpitations. And these are all the immediate responses to stress, right? And you're probably thinking like, oh my goodness, what else is happening to my body when you're feeling stressed? And don't worry, there's still more. Another part too is the gastrointestinal system. So another part of the body is the gut, and it includes millions of neurons that are constantly talking with the brain. So when the body is in a stress response, it can affect the way our stomach is feeling. Sometimes you can feel something in the pit of your stomach, or feeling butterflies in your stomach. It can cause bloating, pain, discomfort, and also, since it's connected to the brain, it can also impact your ability to think and what we're feeling. Stress can also affect our appetite, and in extreme situations, it can cause nausea or vomiting. But there is a myth that we wanted to break today, is that stress causes ulcers, but indeed it doesn't. Stress does not increase acid production in the stomach or cause ulcers, but it can make them worse, right? And especially whenever the hormones are communicating between the brain. Another thing too that you might have noticed is feeling a little bit more hungry, or your changes in your appetite over the pandemic. And that wanted to make sure that you know that you're feeling normal. Your brain is doing what it's supposed to do, your brain and body. Another part too is during stress, our hormones are affected, like we mentioned earlier. And there's actually one hormone nicknamed the stress hormone, and it's called cortisol. It's actually sent throughout the body daily. So when we wake up, we feel a rush of cortisol sometimes, and then it can peter out throughout the day. But during a stress response, a part of the brain creates a cascade of events throughout your whole body to release cortisol from the liver. So let's see. Oh, too far. So this, you don't have to memorize all this, right? But we wanted to show you the science behind it. So the Hpa Axis activates the brain, the alarm system in the brain, to be able to pump cortisol throughout your body, as well as adrenaline. And it triggers this automatic sensation that gets your body ready to either fight or flight. And cortisol can be really helpful, when you need to respond to things that demand an action in the moment. But sometimes when cortisol is there long-term, for example, when you lose power for days during an ice storm, or when you're really cold and you have to respond, but you can't really go anywhere and you can't really do anything, that cortisol kind of stays within your body, and it doesn't really, it feels kind of helpless because there's not much to do. So the cortisol levels are higher than they need to be, and this can affect our bodies in different ways, sleeping differently, making us stressed, and gaining weight. It's something that our body is doing to protect us during those stressful times. And sometimes, I don't know if you've noticed, if you've had any sort of difficulty maintaining a routine across this time, like Yafa was mentioning, or having some sleep problems, it may be because there's a presence of cortisol that hasn't really been released. And again, you don't need to memorize this part, so we're going to go to the next one. Another part that's not surprisingly activated by stress is the nervous system. Sometimes when people say stress, they also say that they're feeling nervous. So it's not too surprising. But whenever it is a stress response, the autonomic nervous system goes into action. And it has two separate parts, and they kind of act like a yin and yang. So the parasympathetic nervous system is intended for rest and relaxation, like this, looks really comfy. The sympathetic nervous system is what's activated during a stress response. So the amygdala, the alarm bell of the brain, activates this need to act, and it can play a role in fear or anxiety responses. So it puts all the energy and focus into resolving whatever's in front of you. So that sympathetic nervous system is activated. But what's important to know, and we'll show you later, that there are ways when you are feeling activated to activate that alternate, the parasympathetic nervous system, intended for rest and relaxation. So there is hope there, even if you're feeling overwhelmed by what's going on in your body. For example, I don't know if you guys remember running out of toilet paper during the first couple of weeks of the pandemic. That's a stressful response. I'm not sure why it only happened in the United States, but it did. And not being able to get hand sanitizer when we didn't really know what was going on. So it's kind of like a fight or flight in some of those videos I saw. But either way, we're trying to figure out how our bodies can adjust to this normal. And let's see, as you can see, that stress affects a lot of different systems within your wonderfully complex body. You know, the stomach, the hormones, nervous system, your heart, and your brain. And an important takeaway for today's presentation is the fact that your body is capable of constantly changing, adapting, and still trying to serve you. So your body is responding to your inputs in the environment to try and help you. However, whenever the prolonged stress is there, like we were mentioning, that cortisol and adrenaline lingering around, it can be, your body could be impacted by these systemic changes, right? So this little guy looks like it's someone protecting themselves from viruses. It's supposed to represent your immune system, because the communication between the brain and your immune system becomes a little bit impaired whenever cortisol is really there a lot, as well as, it could lead to high blood pressure, like we were mentioning, some heart conditions, like heart attack or stroke, as well as some chronic mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, or chronic fatigue. And, since the immune system is kind of associated with metabolic and the gastrointestinal, diabetes is also something that could happen. But again, not like Yafa mentioned, not everyone will experience this, but this can happen with people who experience consistent stress. Okay, so having a little bit of trouble here, but Yafa will be able to talk with you a little bit about compounded stress and what that difference is.
So let's first start by clarifying, how is stress different than trauma? So in trauma, that original stressor and the body's reaction of stress happen in the past, but somehow the symptoms are still present in the now. In other words, the impact of the stressor or traumatic event remains long after the threat has ended. So trauma can develop after a single event that is life-threatening, or at least perceived as being life-threatening. And in a traumatic event, the fight, flight, freeze response is so intensely triggered that the person cannot turn it off after the threat is over. Common examples of situations likely to cause trauma include military combat, robberies, assaults, accidents, natural disasters, and even ICU experiences, so people that suffer and recuperate from very serious medical conditions. In compound stress, it happens when you experience multiple sources of stress at the same time. Think about the last year. We were all in a pandemic. Some people had lost jobs. They were ill. They were afraid of getting ill. They couldn't get tested. They couldn't get vaccinated. Loss of employment, illness. I mean, there were so many things going on. Compound stress really seems to be a label that captures the experience of so many in the last year. But it's important to say that not all compound stress leads to trauma, certainly not to PTSD. So in the next slide, we can see the incidence of trauma in the general population. And as you can see, whereas it could be up to 90% of adults, older adults in our country, by the time they are, towards the end of life, at least they have had one incidence of trauma. So 90% have had at least one incident of trauma. The incidence of trauma among men is smaller than among women. and we're talking about PTSD actual diagnosis, but much higher on other subgroups, including first responders. And for those of us working with Holocaust survivors, we do know that the prolonged traumatic experiences of the Holocaust have led to this population to have one of the highest incidence of trauma. But I do want to say that the incidence of PTSD during the pandemic was actually highest among those who have themselves suffered from serious COVID-19 illness and potential death. We also know that the incidence of PTSD was high among individuals who, as family members or healthcare workers, witnessed others suffering and witnessed others dying. Also, individuals who experienced extreme exposure to the aversive details, like journalists and first responders, medical staff, and medical personnel that were impacted by this on a day-in, day-out basis. And finally, those who learned of death or the risk of death of a family member or friend. And for me, I guess that's most of us. We all know somebody that was deeply affected. I myself have 3 patients who survived COVID, and they were very much affected, their whole family, and still have many symptoms from the illness. I will let Alida continue right now with explaining what are the symptoms of PTSD, of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Thank you, Yaffa. Oh, there we go, it's working. So psychological trauma, right, is a common event involving a threat to life, right? And so injury, violence, like all the examples that Yaffa introduced, this can result in various physical and psychological symptoms, and most people can overcome it. Like we saw in the last slide, not everyone who's exposed to a traumatic event develops PTSD. But how do we know when it's different, right? And a little, like I'm going to emphasize, not everyone who's exposed develops it. PTSD is something where it's like the trauma is recurring in the present moment, even whenever the threat has passed, like Yaffa said. So example are, intrusive symptoms, right? Something where it's recurrent and intrusive memories of, of the traumatic event or the multiple traumatic events that you don't want to remember. This can include nightmares, flashbacks in the moment that are difficult to control. Another thing too is avoiding memories or triggers of that event or events. For example, not really wanting to associate people with people who were there, not wanting to go back to that place or to a distressing memory, not wanting to remember those, saying, oh, no, I'm going to put that out of my mind. Also, PTSD can have a negative effect on your mood. If you're feeling intense feelings of guilt, anger, or shame, and we'll talk about shame a little bit later, or loss of interest in enjoyable activities, which are also kind of similar to feelings of depression, it can feel kind of different as a result of PTSD or feeling these overwhelming feelings. Another thing too is feeling increased arousal in the idea of having trouble sleeping or resting, as well as hypervigilance, which means essentially feeling on edge or feeling as if you have to be on your toes or just keeping aware that something bad might happen, even when there's not a threat of something bad happening. And with PTSD, it's important to clarify that in order for it to be diagnosed, it can impair all the different aspects of your life, right? So social, physical, being able to go to work, being able to go visit friends, being able to involve with family members. And so if you're starting to notice that, this is something that you're not alone with. And another thing too that I wanted to emphasize about shame is that and PTSD is less common, and you develop when symptoms from a psychological trauma disrupts daily functioning, like I was saying earlier, and that experience kind of lasts longer. And it's more difficult for people to just get over it or walk it off. And that can lead to, that idea can lead to intense feelings of shame, as if you did something wrong, or, why am I feeling this way? It was years ago, or it's just a pandemic. Everyone's experiencing this. But we wanted to emphasize throughout this presentation that these symptoms, like we were talking about earlier, can be automatic responses to what you're feeling. Your body can immediately feel this, or, long term feel this way. And sometimes they just last longer. It's not that you did anything wrong, right? And so considering everything that we've been through over the last 15 months, I think, it's important to learn that you're not alone in what you're experiencing and that nothing is wrong with you. We hope to help you understand that what you're feeling is that you're not flawed for feeling this way. Shame is a learned response, and it also can be unlearned. Even if you find yourself struggling, there is hope and non-judgmental empathy. So being able to express understanding is a foundation of a therapeutic relationship. And so we have some clinicians on the call as well, but learning how to incorporate empathy and understanding into your own internal mind is crucial for healing. And this year has not been normal, but your body is responding to what all is going on that was abnormal in order to try and protect you. And therapy can provide hope. So wanted to make sure we emphasize that. So another thing too that can be overwhelming with with trauma or PTSD is the idea of having multiple events, right? Massive losses. So repeated traumas and avoidance, intrusive mood symptoms. For example, if someone is experienced some trauma in childhood or earlier in life, and then having another experience that may remind them of the event or may not, just may impact them. It can lead to complex PTSD. For example, if you experienced the tornado, the ones last week, as well as the one back in October of 2019. It's hard to tell what time is during these times of Corona, but it was really devastating in the pandemic and this isolation that was caused by it, and the winter storm, all the different massive losses where that symptoms of feeling of distress and is more significant. And it can also lead to periods of amnesia or dissociation and extreme feelings of shame or guilt, like we were mentioning, that impacts all areas of your life, school, personal, social. And so we wanted to make sure that we emphasize that difference between complex trauma as well as PTSD and then a traumatic event or stress. With that being said, I hope you're not confused. So Yafa is going to try and review all the different things that we've been covering today.
Thank you, Alita. All right, so let's review what Alita has presented to us so far. Stress happens in the environment and demands a response. That's to say, if a toddler is running into the street, he must be run after. If a car is swerving, it demands that I slam the brakes. The pipes freeze, we turn off the water main. The tornado sirens go off, we run to the safety of our designated room. So when this happens, our body releases good amounts of cortisol and adrenaline. It activates the body in all the ways that Alita described to help us succeed in taking the action that will protect us. We will feel a rush of energy. We will move faster. Our hearts will be pumping, and we will get the job done. But it doesn't always work like that. And let me give you an example of something that happened to me a long time ago that made me understand what all of these changes are that happen in our body and why it is so important that we know what we need to do in certain situations. So I was traveling with my brother when all of a sudden I started having hiccups. Now, for those of you who don't know me very well, when I get hiccups, they're pretty loud. Everybody turns around, it's painful, they don't go away forever, and people don't know if there's something wrong, if I swallow a frog, if I'm dying. Anyway, my brother had it in his mind that if he scares me, I might get rid of the hiccups. All of a sudden, he's looking at me, his eyes are popping out, and he's going, "Oh my gosh, what's that thing on your neck? Oh, what is it?" And he's acting as though there's, I don't know, a gushing blood coming out of my neck, or maybe a massive tarantula crawling. I didn't know what was going on. So I started yelling, "Take it off, take it off." My brother starts laughing, of course. And as he's laughing, I come to the realization that I don't have the hiccups anymore. And actually, this little experiment does work. However, my heart was pumping. I felt completely unhinged. I wanted to run. I actually started running in circles around him. I can't believe you just did this. I wanted to hit him. I had this anger. I had all this energy. I wanted to pound something. I didn't know what to do with myself. That's the best example I can think of experiencing all of these things that Alida mentioned earlier. The rush of hormones, the changes in the physiology, the emotional experience, the psychological components, the impact in relationships. In this example, I had all of those changes in my body caused by this stressor and nothing to show for. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't fight. I couldn't flight. This release of cortisol that we have discussed before is meant to be adaptive. We should have something to do with it. But when we cannot fight or flight, we will feel unease, discomfort, anger, and all the things that I experience, in addition to headaches, anger, frustration, high blood pressure. Who knows if I get that too? So this presents a significant challenge to everyone during the pandemic, when we felt the silent threat of a new virus, and our bodies may have gone into fight or flight, but we had to stay put at home and find other ways to regulate our systems. I have also wondered about the toilet paper. Actually, I have thought whether that running to the stores to get toilet paper and Lysol was not being fueled by this sense of fight or flight when there was nothing else we could do to protect ourselves. When stress is prolonged, our body can be affected by the chronically elevated levels of cortisol and adrenaline and the other changes in our neurobiology. So no wonder we would feel anxious and afraid and depressed and fatigued during the whole pandemic. Now, our response to new challenges will now be affected by the impact of past experiences. Like Alida said, if you had a previous experience of trauma, that can really affect how you may experience new challenges in the future. And now that we have had the pandemic, we can fall into a pattern of a vicious circle where our system is already heightened, hyper alert, and here comes somebody else getting sick, and here comes a winter storm, and here comes a new tornado. So we go from a baseline of activation, and each of those events makes us baseline become higher and higher, coming closer to a point where we will be activated. One of the things that scientists have discovered more recently is that this cycle can actually cause neural networks to impact our genes. This is what they refer to as epigenetics, or the effects of our biological systems as they affect our physiological biology and genetics. That chromosome in this image shows some red tips that are called the telomeres. I want to share two thoughts coming from the scientific community, one about telomeres and the other one about the intergenerational transmission of trauma, as this illustrates something that is important for us to hear the wisdom behind this new scientific knowledge. So telomeres are the caps that protect our chromosomes. It protects the chromosomes from deterioration that would lead to disease and aging. In fact, telomeres shorten as we get older. And for those who have experienced a lot of illness, they may be shorter. And for those who have had a lot of trauma, they also get shorter. Telomeres can be damaged by our experiences. But guess what? They can also be regrown. And we did not know that until more recently. We can regrow our telomeres. And in the last part of this presentation, we will talk about some of the ways in which we can do that. The second piece of information is coming from the literature and the research on the intergenerational transmission of trauma. So we know that many of the effects of trauma can be transmitted to the next generation. The subsequent generation, who they have not themselves been exposed to a traumatic stressor. A lot of the research that has really brought our attention to this phenomenon is coming from research on Holocaust survivors and the second generation. They looked at the experiences and the physiology and the genes of second generation. These are the children of Holocaust survivors. They found changes in a gene linked to cortisol, that hormone we talked about earlier, that is involved in the stress reaction that may underlie the high incidence of health problems in second generation survivors. And guess what? Even cortisol is something that we can change. High levels of cortisol, which affect our anxiety and keep us from sleeping and cause high blood pressure, we can actively lower the secretion of cortisol in our bodies and help our body regulate back to the proper production of cortisol, which, as Alida mentioned, should be higher in the morning as we wake up to energize us to the day ahead, and should be lower in the evening as we get ready for sleep. This is one of the reasons why stressful events will actually affect our ability to fall asleep or stay asleep during the night. So again, the good news is that scientists now have shown that therapeutic interventions for stress and even for trauma not only will help us feel better, but actually will cause positive epigenetic changes, even lengthening our gene telomeres or increasing our resilience to the effects of future stressors. So science is growing, and I know a lot remains to be discovered, but what we know is amazing. With this information about the epigenetic transmission of trauma that can be undone, we understand the power of evidence-based psychological therapies that support healing. So if we know that interventions can even grow our telomeres or improve our cortisol function, then we know just how important it is to be proactive about coping and building our resilience. And now that the pandemic seems controlled, some may still be struggling on how to move forward to a new normal, how to go back to socializing the way it feels natural, how to return to work in the office, resume childcare. How are we to prioritize appointments? What is really necessary and important in our lives? Are we going to send our young adult children back to campus? Which activities are we going to resume? And yet, for those who remain vulnerable, like cancer patients undergoing cancer treatment, and anybody with immunologic conditions, and including the COVID long haulers, those who have survived COVID but are still struggling with the aftermath of COVID-19. For them, there are many challenges related to needing to continue to be careful, while those around us may not be as much. We may not be wearing masks. We may be going back to normal and going out, but they may not be able to do that just as much. So we hope that the next section of this presentation will not only help you manage stress in the future much better, but it will assist you in moving forward with your life at this time and help you with building resilience for future challenges. So moving to resilience. Resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, or threats, or any other significant source of stress in our lives. And I want to go over 6 things that we can all do to increase our resilience and our adjustment. The first one should be obvious to all of us: building social connections. Nowhere in our lives have we been more aware of the power of social connections than in a year of isolation throughout the pandemic. We have learned how critical social support was when we could not have it. We have to prioritize and expand the depth and the breadth of our social support. We need to have both emotional and instrumental support from different types of individuals and parts of our communities. We need to help children reestablish social connections in ways that are appropriate for their age. And we need to assist our aging parents recreating those connections, having that one-to-one contact and care. Most of us needed to practice small talk after being isolated during pandemic, as some of that still feels awkward. We may need to reestablish balance in our responsibilities and independence with regard to how we parent our children in ways that are age appropriate. We may need to reset family game nights. And we need to work on communication, prioritizing, and compromising to rebuild those social networks. The second factor is fostering wellness. So during the pandemic, many struggled to keep structure in their lives. And during the winter storm, those who were less fortunate struggled to reduce water damage for days and days. Of course, didn't have much time for personal wellness. And that obviously was not a priority. Yet maintaining wellness, even in times of crisis, is very important, especially when we do not know how long the crisis is going to be. Another factor is focusing on self-care, eating healthy, staying well hydrated, maintaining regular forms of exercise, because it reduces the toll of stress on the body, and it will help us manage anxiety and depression. We also have to maintain our healthy schedules and habits to foster structure and a sense of order that facilitate restorative sleep and predictability in our lives. We can engage in mindful activities like prayer, meditation, gratitude journaling, or yoga, which increase well-being, positivity, and will restore hope. And I'm sorry to have to mention this, but we also need to avoid negative outlets. Yes, that little cup of wine is great in the evening, but if you find yourself finishing a whole bottle every night, maybe you went too far. And TV can be fun, but if you were sitting for 8 hours straight watching the whole series until 3 in the morning, or gaming until the wee hours of the night, yes, it probably temporarily masked the distress you were feeling, because acute coping can work in the moment, but it will not be adaptive long-term. So we all need to return to some level of moderation. The third factor is embracing positive thoughts. How do we maintain perspective? How do we avoid irrational thoughts or catastrophizing? You know, when we think, oh my gosh, I probably will run out of water later. Oh my gosh, we're going to all go thirsty. Oh my gosh, we're going to all die of thirst. I mean, catastrophizing is when we allow one factor, one situation to run in our minds to the worst possible scenarios. We can work on accepting change and accepting what we cannot change. We can remain hopeful and optimistic by cultivating a positive outlook. We can use visualization and look at what we really want in life, as opposed to allowing fear to give us images of the things we mostly want to avoid and not have in our mind. And we can learn from past experiences, what was good, how we cope well, our successes, and never forget to look for those silver linings. Love those English expressions. The fourth factor will be finding purpose. How do we live a life with a sense of purpose and meaning? Can we identify our values and our priorities and engage those in life? Can we be proactive? What can I do about my situation right now? Can I break any challenges into manageable parts? And I can engage in helping others. We know that I can support a friend. You can volunteer in the community. We can all find a sense of purpose, self-worth, and connectedness by volunteering. It also helps to set realistic goals, to seek activities of self-discovery and growth. And we need to find ways to share our values with our loved ones. We can do legacy projects together. Maybe we will be researching genealogy and include our older generations. Or maybe we'll be growing a vegetable garden with the children and donating the proceeds of the garden to a shelter. The fifth factor will be prevention and preparedness. And I am going to tell you that I did not find this anywhere in the literature. And I refuse to exclude this factor from this presentation. Having knowledge on how to manage emergencies helps bypass the freeze response. And having a large number of coping skills and experiences under our belt will increase the likelihood that we will use those coping skills in the case of a crisis. Knowing what to do in different crises can help us not to freeze, fight, or flight. We won't let fear or the fear of facing the fear stop us. In other words, having knowledge, having a plan, and a rehearsal of a plan can increase our self-efficacy during crises. Let me give you an example. During the winter storm, many of us knew we might have to shut our water mains. And some of us knew where the water main was, but a lot of us did not know how to close it. We haven't even tried to do it. We had not realized it was too tight. We might need a wrench or a tool to close that main. So when the time came to do it, we may have endured much greater water damage because of not being prepared and having a plan and having the tools to deal with that potential crisis. Anybody who's lived through earthquakes and tornadoes, those of us from Mexico City, or who have lived in Tornado Alley, know perfectly well that it is important to have a safety plan to ensure that all family members know what to do in case of an emergency. I have to tell you, during a really bad year of tornadoes, when I lived in Omaha, I actually set up a teepee in my unfinished basement. I put all kinds of supplies in there. I got a little battery-operated radio for myself, and then cute flashlights for the kids with snacks and stuffed animals for their comfort. As soon as the sirens will sound, everybody will know exactly what to do. The kids will just rush down the stairs and get into the teepee and start opening all the goodies that we had placed in there. We did this many times, day as well as in the middle of the night. Last factor will be seeking help. Knowing when we cannot do it alone and having a backup plan with names of those who might be able to help us, agencies with services or referrals that might be able to assist us can be very helpful. I want to always think that we can honor ourselves by knowing our limits and that we will be able to seek help because we will understand that seeking help is not a sign of weakness, but an act of self-love. I'd like to add also a little thought on a new development in our fellow psychologist work and research. And this is the idea of post-traumatic growth. Honestly, this is not really a new idea. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who wrote Man in Search of Meaning, spoke in this book about how people could thrive after trauma by seeking, finding, or even imposing meaning on the traumatic experience. Therefore, shifting away from a paralyzing experience of trauma to one in which they could find hope, a resurgence, growth, an opportunity to move forward and reclaim their lives. But new researchers in the 1990s have been coining this new term, post-traumatic growth. It is a positive change that occurs in the aftermath of struggling with a major crisis or traumatic event. It will look different in every person. It most often occurs after a situation has ended, and it is a process and not an outcome. And it involves certain things that are different from the aspects we discussed about resilience. It involves appreciation of life, enhancement of relationships, seeing new possibilities in life, finding new personal strengths, spiritual or existential changes, fostering of optimism, altruism, social support, self-confidence without stigma or shame, and increasing as we focus on our gratitude for small things. Even if we have experienced devastating loss, we can still focus on small things that we can be grateful for. I want to quickly go through some of the coping skills in this page. As you can see, there are many things that we can do to increase our adaptation and our coping. I want to talk about a couple that you may not be familiar with. In addition to exercising, dancing, swinging, and rocking in a chair, we can also shake. And I will encourage you next time you're super stressful and if you want to turn off your video to do this, you can just shake. You can do it to music or without music. And you will find out an incredible release to that tension that we accumulate in our muscles. I also want to show you a couple of skills that you can do, you can teach your parents, and you can do with children that are great for stressful moments. Of course, hugging them and having touch and embracing and massage, we know how powerful hugs can be. But sometimes there's nobody there to do it for us, so we can always hug ourselves. I want to show you a couple of things that you can do that are known to reduce the stressful effects in the many ways that Alida described earlier. The first one for those who do yoga is eagle arms. So you extend your arms, you bring them closer, and you wrap them. Once they're wrapped, you bring them down. You can close your eyes and breathe for a moment. This is a very centering movement and is very soothing. If this is hard to do, we can do a modified version of it. We can hug ourselves just like this. We can put our hands in our chest, on our hearts. This is also very soothing. If a child is overactive or if you're having a headache, you can put your hands on your forehead and the back of your head. And when you do any of these positions, you can maintain some deep breathing for a couple of minutes, allowing the full benefit of these activities to soothe you. We can also put our hand on our heart and the other hand on our belly while we breathe. And we can use weighted blankets, which are very soothing for relaxation purposes. We can also work on managing our breath. And I want to introduce you to a couple of very brief skills that can be incredible. The first one is my favorite. And it's imagining that you have bubbles. You've all had bubbles, a stick for blowing bubbles. And what you're going to do, you're going to blow bubbles, which require you to press your lips and allow the air to flow out slowly. Remember, if you go, then it breaks and you don't get bubbles. But if you go really slowly, it can be super soothing. Now you can even imagine the bubbles going out if you don't have them, allowing the air to bring them up and down, seeing them going one way, going to the other, and that is really soothing. Or you can imagine children blowing bubbles. For those of you that the image of children is very soothing and relaxing and joy-giving. Another exercise that we can practice, but I want to ask you to do something first. I know we went through a lot of information today, and I would like for you to rate your level of stress in a scale from 1 to 10. 1 being no stressful at all, and 10 being super stressed. Just to yourself, think for a moment, how stressed I am. And take a note, write it down, or just take a note. You don't have to share that with anyone. I want you to do that when you practice any deep breathing exercises at home, and rate your level of stress before you do it and after. Try to practice for about 10 minutes. All right. The next exercise I would like to introduce you to is the basic diaphragmatic breathing. And to do this, we want to start in a very comfortable position, feet on the ground. If you can have something supporting your back, is super helpful. You can put your hands on your lap, keep your feet uncrossed, maintaining a right angle between your body and your legs. You can also practice this standing up, And you could even do it laying down at night with your hands by your side, your feet uncrossed. And it's a great exercise to do to induce sleep and relaxation at the end of the day. So in diaphragmatic breathing, what we want to do is be mindful of the fact that we don't want to engage our shoulders going up. That's very shallow breathing, which is what we do when we are stressed or angry. On the contrary, we want the air to come in all the way to the abdomen. And as we inhale with our hands on our abdomen, we want to feel the abdomen inflating as though it were a balloon. We inhale at a rhythm that is safe and comfortable for us. And when we exhale, we try to exhale a little longer for a little more time than the inhale, allowing the air to come out really slowly through those pierced lips. So again, we breathe in and we exhale. An additional modification that you can do as you become comfortable with this is to add a thought or an affirmation to your breathing. So for example, we can do the same exercise, and as we exhale, say to ourselves in our mind, relaxed. Breathe in, breathe out, saying relaxed. Breathe in, relax. Affirmations are super powerful, and we all have to experiment to find the affirmations that are more soothing for us. Most people love relax because it's a great, clear command for many parts of our body to let go of the tension and the stress of our bodies. But depending on who you are, what you're going through, a different word may be more powerful. It may be peace. Peace. It may be calm. It may be shalom. It may be balance or harmony. So each of you knows what word has the greatest power within you. And it could even be that at different situations, you want something else. So at a stressful moment at work, you may want balance or harmony. But when you're get ready to go to sleep, you may want relaxed, calm, or asleep. Try saying to yourself, sleep, and you will be surprised how powerful that can be. So we want to give you some resources to help you practice diaphragmatic breathing and other skills. One of the resources is the Ptsd Coach. It's an app that you can download. It was designed by the VA system to help us all deal through the COVID pandemic. It includes tens of different skills that you can practice, including a variety of breathing techniques, pursed lip, diaphragmatic breathing, number counting, and many others. Skills that introduce visualization, like the body scan, meditation, and a variety of other skills that can help you create your own affirmations or practice different skills for different aspects of coping. So I highly recommend that one. There's also by the VA, the Ptsd Coach. And the Ptsd Coach is actually designed a long time ago, and it was the one that they used to base the COVID Coach one for. The Ptsd Coach will give you lots of exercises that you can do to reduce the stress of trauma. Now, we want to say that these tools were developed by the VA system to help clinicians help clients do better and practice the skills that we teach in our sessions. We want you to know that if practicing these skills are soothing and good for you, go ahead and continue. But if they are not enough, if you're still experiencing distress, if you know that you're not back to the normal that you would expect yourself to be at, if you find yourself with a short fuse with your children or spouses or friends or parents, if you know that you are struggling and you all saw the lists of symptoms that Alita described before, then we want you to know that you can seek help. And with this, Alita wants to go a little bit over some of the other things that we have for you at the end of our presentation before we move into a Q&A session.
Hello, I'm able to unmute now. One of the things that we did want to briefly mention, because I realize it's about 2:03, we wanted to mention that there's so many different ways of having, I'm trying to get my computer's not really working so well right now, but one of the things that's really wonderful is that science has really helped our create evidence-based techniques for healing trauma. Eye movement desensitization reprocessing, EMDR, DBT, cognitive processing therapy, and other health-based approaches have been really helpful to find that hope within and knowing that therapy can heal. And knowing that you're not stuck or defined by your experience, even if it feels as if you're overwhelmed. And I did want to just share some of our references today to make sure that we give homage to the people that we got all this information from. So we got from a lot of different academic institutions, even though we tried to make it a little bit more engaging. Additionally, it's really big, but if you would like to know how to reach JFS or talk to the intake line, feel free to call the main line. And if you can ask for intake if someone answers, and if they don't, then you can utilize extension 340 to be able to try and get connected to the intake line if you're looking for services. We're here to help and have an open door to all in need. With that being said, is there anything else that I missed, Yafa?
We just want to remind you about some of the takeaway points for our presentation. And that is that there's a lot that we can do to build our resilience and to become more likely to deal with life challenges as we move forth in our life. And if we can learn something from this long haul of a pandemic and all of the other stressors that many of us endured, is that, it was a good thermometer for ourselves. Maybe we weren't doing as well as we thought we were. Maybe the challenges were just too great. In any case, it's a good time to review where we are in our lives and to make some changes if we need to, and take this opportunity for that post-traumatic growth. How can we take this incredible challenge we experience and grow from it, be better with each other, be better for ourselves? We did plan to stay past the hour for any questions or comments. So we welcome if you are here with us and have a question or a comment you would like to share, you can do so through the chat. And also, if you have, I don't know if we got any questions so far in the chat. I will admit I was not looking during the presentation. I think we were fine. So you can post any question right now, or if you prefer to unmute yourself, you can do that as well.
You did such a good job explaining it. So there's no questions. For me, a comment that I noticed, even through learning about this, was the idea of the epigenetics. This was new research that actually Yafa introduced me to, the idea that even though our telomeres have been impacted by past trauma, that we have the capacity to constantly heal and change and to give intention to ourselves. So that's something that I really wanted to emphasize. It's not a question, but just something to say.
And a piece that we skipped a little bit for the sake of time is just the importance of finding the tools that are right for you. You may hear of people doing meditation and mindfulness, but that may not be you. Maybe for you, gratitude journaling is where you will find your groove, where you'll find your comfort space and when you become centered. There are huge benefits for those who exercise, and we know that running releases endorphins that are great for your well-being. But that doesn't mean that that there are times where we need to find skills that allow us to calm and be grounded within us. So the pandemic gave some people great opportunities to explore different learning. And I think all of us have really, and I know Debbie Weiner, who's with us today, will attest to this. We've been surprised by how much we can do online. What a powerful tool we have to deliver services and to connect to the world in ways that we did not think possible, especially among middle-aged and older adults who may not have joined the tele-everything revolution as the younger generations had done already. So we have now access to incredible resources, communication all over the world. So in a way, the distance between us in this year of isolation, the distance between us in a way decreased, even though our ability to be face-to-face with each other was not there. Well, we welcome any questions to us. You know how to reach Alita and I at Jewish Family Service of Greater Dallas. Know that we have intake available to help you or loved ones seek services. Many times we have participants in our programs that are not seeking service for themselves, but that they want to know how to help others. So you are their ears today. And if you know somebody that is struggling and needs assistance, let them know that there is certainly no shame on seeking help. On the contrary, as I said earlier, it may be one of your greatest acts of self-love.
Thank you all so much for all your assistance today and for your participation. We're really appreciative. It doesn't look like there's too many more questions. I wonder if we'd be okay if we can stop recording and allow people to